good question, and I would have to say my most effective teacher has been my mother. Teaching me not so much in terms of a lesson, but teaching me in the way she actually prayed, watching how she kept prayer at the front and center of her life, watching how she forever incorporated God into the problems and the everyday situations of life. That was a teaching experience for me, and I just lift that up and grateful for that.
In early 2020, I had the opportunity to travel to Israel, and that really impacted me, especially the Friday night meal we had with the rabbi who was leading us, and seeing that prayer. It was tactile. It wasn't just spoken. It was with the wine and the bread and the entire meal. And there were multiple stages of prayer, and seeing how the entire city of Jerusalem shut down at sundown on Friday and stayed that way through Saturday. That was really like living footsteps of prayer. And I really want that, not just prayer to be times of words in my life. I want it to be that really like tactile integrated way of living prayer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think about my friend, who's a real good friend of mine in high school, and then we roomed together my first 2 years of college. His name was Ben, and he was a person who was always had really strong faith. He stood out to me as someone who had a really robust faith. And I remember watching him pray before meals, like before lunch and breakfast. Like we would be at the school cafeteria, and he would sit down and just bow his head very quietly and just say a prayer to himself. I grew up, we would pray at supper time. And that was more like a ritual we would do. At supper time, we would say a blessing before our meal. And what I learned from Ben is that every meal can be an occasion for prayer, and so many more moments in life can be an occasion for prayer if we're willing to just pause and take that time to thank God for these moments in life. So I really am grateful for my friend Ben for just kind of opening up my mind to what prayer could be. It doesn't have to be this set ritual, but it can be finding any opportunity to thank God and ask a blessing over whatever we're doing.
Right. It sort of keeps God in everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think one of the first things we can learn from Jesus is that prayer was not a little thing for Jesus. Prayer was at the front and center. Of course, he did other things. He healed the sick and preached and taught and that type of thing, but he did not neglect prayer, and that just comes through loud and clear in his actions. The fact that he sometimes went and prayed all night when he had the 5,000, the fact that first he prayed, it just showed that he respected God in the totality of life, and that just speaks to me.
I love all of that, mentioning all those different times Jesus prayed. I'm also struck by the times Jesus would go away by himself to pray. Absolutely. That he would take that time, and it was not insignificant amounts of time. As a busy mom with 3 kids, like that's hard for me to remember. To follow that example of Jesus, to take that time to go away, to spend time in prayer, and then come back ready to continue ministry, continue work, continue life.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I just, my mind immediately goes to the Lord's Prayer. You know, the prayer that Jesus gave us and that we recite. At least my church, we recite it every week in worship. And it's one that I've started praying every night as I'm falling asleep. I'll just say the Lord's Prayer in addition to my other prayers. And so I appreciate that prayer from Jesus, and I appreciate that as like a way to structure my prayers, to think about all the different sort of following that prayer and expanding it as I'm praying and turning it into a longer prayer. But I really appreciate that that way of praying, and that's where my mind immediately goes when I think about what we learn from Jesus.
Right, absolutely. It is often most difficult when reality challenges my faith. One personal example is about 3 days ago, my daughter-in-law called me and told me that my daughter had a heart attack, and she was getting ready to go to an open heart surgery, which she did, and the operation was a success, by the way, and seems that she's doing quite well now. But at that moment, that's a difficult time because it really challenges your faith, and it's sort of, you immediately go to where is God, and God, what do I do now, and that type of, so it's really a tension time. Thank God, I think I had the resolve to sort of relax and remind myself that God knows everything, God sees everything, nothing happens without God's awareness, and so that sort of calmed me down. Prayer centered me and allowed me to know that God had this thing. Mm-hmm. So that was just comforting to me. But that was a difficult time to pray.
I think I most encounter blocks in my prayer life when life just becomes like that rote. We're getting from day to day. We've got a lot of things going on. And I kind of forget to take time out to pray, or I forget that it's okay to pray as I'm dropping off kids in the car line, right, as I'm walking a couple laps during soccer practice, as I'm hiking in the morning a couple times a week. Those feel like part of my busy schedule, but they are part of my life that I want to be a more integrated life of continuous prayer. But that's when it's hard, is when I feel like I don't have something big hit me, right, that I'm just living day-to-day life.
Right.
I think for me the challenge is often praying the same prayer, often with the same words all the time, and I'll just find myself sort of repeating prayers that I've said before, and I'm not really thinking about the meaning of them. And so then it becomes hard for me to pray because I'm like, well, what good is this doing if I'm just saying the same thing? I kind of lose sight of the fact that A, it's forming a good habit in me to always look for connection with God, and B, that I can sort of pause and express myself in other ways to God. So for me, often the challenge is finding new and fresh ways to continue to talk with God that prevents it from becoming sort of a quote-unquote mindless repetition, right, kind of thing. Because I think that's where I bump up against difficulty in prayer.
As I think back on that, I think for me, God would answer prayer in 3 ways: yes, no, wait. And I think some of the greatest answers to my prayers have been when God said no. Because if He had said, if the Lord had said yes, then it'd have been too soon. It'd have been out of my timing, and I actually have had experience where I thanked God for not answering my prayer, knowing that if God had answered my prayer, it would have been too soon. I would have been out of step, and I would have hurt myself as well as hurt somebody else. So anyway, that's my experience, that God answers prayer pretty much in yes, no, and wait.
I feel like I often hear God answering prayer through other people in my life.
Okay.
Through kind of my trusted people, through Brian, through my parents, through really close friends. If I've been praying on something, or I'm looking for affirmation and what is the right way forward, oftentimes I can hear that in what people say to me. They might say, oh, I see this thing you're really good at, or here's an opportunity that you might not have thought about. And I'm like, yes, that's the right opportunity for right now. I didn't even know I was praying for something, but I didn't know I was praying for this. And I feel like sometimes that's how God best reaches me, is through other people.
I'll often think about when I'm praying about things that feel like there's not easy answers. Often when I'm praying, it's because I don't see an easy answer, and I'm looking for certainty or clarity or something like that. And I feel like God often answers those prayers by putting my heart at ease, by putting my mind at ease, by assuring me that God is in this. And even if I come out with just as little clarity or certainty as before, I feel like I'll often leave knowing, but it's going to be okay. One way or another, God has got me one way or another, it's going to work out. And so it's almost like God answers with reassurance, with strength, with a sort of comfort with not knowing oftentimes. But it's often when God answers my prayers, it's just God working in my own heart to put my own heart at ease for whatever it is that I'm facing or praying about.
Yeah. And I also think sometimes there's just what I would call an inner knowing. There's just a knowing that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I think you have to test that. But I think sometimes there's just an inner knowing, just like when John Wesley had his Aldersgate experience and he said, I knew. There was an inner knowing that I know I'm in the right place. I just know there's something good. I know there's something beyond myself. I know that's a little mystical, but I believe it's very real.
Yeah, I agree.
Heart strangely warm.
Heart strangely warm, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I would say in a nutshell, confession simply means coming clean with God. As I look at, as I read the writings of David and others, especially in Psalm 51, David just came clean with God and he said, God, this is what I did. I think confession is simply recognizing and saying, this is who I am. I'm a fallen creature. I've made a mistake. And not only confessing who we are, but I think it's also confessing who God is to us. And it just keeps it real, you know.
When I think about confession, I think about the sacrament of communion,
Yes.
which is really kind of the only place in the Methodist worship service where you have a moment of confession. We attend a communion service almost every Sunday. And so every Sunday I find myself with that quiet minute where it says in the bulletin, time is silent confession. And you're like, man, where did I go wrong this week? How, okay, God, I recognize that happened. That was not my best moment. And usually by the time you get there, it's up and they're talking again and they pardon you and you pardon the pastors and it's kind of a great moment. And then everybody goes up to partake in the Lord's table together. But I like that rhythm of coming up against it every week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think confession, sort of drawn on what both of you said, is for me it's a matter of honesty. It's a matter of you said coming clean. It's a matter of being real with God and being real with yourself and sort of admitting to yourself what you've done wrong, things you might not even realize, but once you start digging into it, you'll see it in clearer light, and you're like, oh yeah, I've really gotta admit this to myself and to God. But then I think there's also freedom in that, because once you see it clearly as God sees it, then you can start doing something about it. Then you can ask for forgiveness. You mentioned the communion liturgy. One of my favorite parts of that liturgy in the prayer for confession is when we say, "Free us for joyful obedience."
Absolutely.
You know, we ask for that freedom to obey God. So part of that confession leads to our freedom from sin.
Absolutely. And for me, that's the grace of God coming in to our situation, broken as it is, confused as it is, and saying, I still love you and my love is still there for you. So I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
Well, I would say if confession is coming clean before God and laying ourselves before God, I would say, first I say they definitely are connected. And prayer, confession is a type of simply acknowledging who we are before God, acknowledging our shortfalls and so forth and so on, and acknowledging also who God is. But I think prayer takes it one step further and simply lays ourselves out before God and asks God to come and intervene. That would sort of be how I would see that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think they go oftentimes hand in hand. And when I think about confession, I also think about the fact that God knows all of this.
Absolutely.
God knows the hairs on our heads. God knows the dark places in our heart that and so confession is us dealing with that. Saying, you see this, now I'm going to admit to seeing this. Now we pray, God, please, whatever your next step is to work towards reconciliation, giving yourself grace, giving others grace. But I think your prayer life can be better for confession.
When I was a teenager, I remember one of my youth group volunteers, one of our counselors, taught us a way to pray that was using the acronym ACTS, A-C-T-S.
Yes.
And confession was the C. It's adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. And so from learning that, I prayed using that for a long, long time. And sometimes my confession would be really, really short, like, God, I messed up this week or whatever. And sometimes it would be really long because I'd be really dealing with some stuff. But for me, it was just knowing that always had a home in prayer. There was always space for that in prayer. And that also, prayer wasn't only that, but prayer was also praising and thanking God, and prayer was asking God for whatever it is that we need. So just knowing that they go hand in hand, even just having it in the acronym, showed me that confession is at home in prayer always,
Yes,
whenever
yes.
it's needed. Yes.